Black CEO denied first-class seat. 30 minutes later, he fires the flight crew. The words sliced through the first-class cabin air with surgical precision. Patricia Henderson, senior flight attendant for Skylink Airlines, made no attempt to mask her disgust as she examined the boarding pass for the third time. Her manicured nails tapped against the paper, each sound a small hammer of judgment against Marcus Johnson's dignity. The 45-year-old black man stood before her in his unremarkable charcoal suit, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove his worth. Yet Patricia held his boarding pass up to the light, as if expecting it to reveal itself as counterfeit, her pale blue eyes narrowing with each inspection. She announced loudly enough for other first-class passengers to hear that she would need to verify this with ground control. Sometimes there were irregularities with certain bookings. The pause before irregularities hung in the air like a noose, its meaning clear to everyone within earshot. Marcus simply nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Behind him, a line of passengers grew restless. A woman in designer clothing pushed past with an exaggerated sigh, and Patricia's entire demeanor transformed. She welcomed the woman with genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the cold suspicion she directed at Marcus. The humiliation was intentional, performed for an audience that shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked away, others leaned in, drawn to drama like moths to flame. Marcus remained still, a statue of dignity in a theater of degradation. Patricia reached for the cabin phone with theatrical deliberation, her movements designed to maximize his embarrassment. She spoke into the phone, enunciating each word carefully. She needed to verify a passenger in 1A Marcus Johnson. Yes, that's right. She just wanted to be certain. Her tone suggested she hoped certainty would prove impossible. The scene unfolded with the inevitability of a tragedy foretold. None of the witnesses could imagine that in 30 minutes, the power dynamics on Flight 1247 would shift so dramatically that this moment would become legendary in aviation history. They couldn't foresee that Patricia Henderson's prejudice would cost her everything, or that Marcus Johnson's quiet dignity masked authority that would soon remake their entire world. Marcus settled into seat 1A with practiced ease, his movements economical and precise. He pulled out his laptop, the screen immediately filling with quarterly reports and acquisition documents. The Skylink Airlines logo appeared prominently on one page, followed by confidential financial data that would make any Wall Street analyst salivate. He had been reviewing these numbers for weeks, ever since the hostile takeover was completed. The announcement wasn't public yet. That was scheduled for next week. Patricia returned, this time with backup. Flight attendant Michael Torres hovered behind her, his presence meant to intimidate. The two crew members had perfected this routine over years of unchallenged discrimination. Patricia's voice dripped with false courtesy as she requested additional identification. She claimed it was a new security protocol they were implementing, carefully omitting that this protocol seemed to apply only to passengers who looked like Marcus. Without complaint, Marcus reached for his wallet, producing his driver's license and the credit card used for the purchase. Patricia examined each as if she were a forensic investigator, turning them over, holding them to the light, photographing them with her phone. Michael leaned in, whispering something about unusual patterns and high-risk bookings, his voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. From seat 2B, an older white businessman watched the scene with mild interest. When he inquired if there was a problem, Patricia's entire demeanor shifted. She assured him everything was fine, just following protocol, and offered him pre-flight champagne. The contrast was sharp enough to cut servility for the white passenger. suspicion for the black one. Patricia pressed on with her interrogation, demanding to know Marcus's employment information. What company did he work for? What was the nature of his business? How often did he fly first class? Each question came loaded with implications, each answer met with skepticism. Marcus responded simply that he worked in acquisitions, his fingers moving across his laptop keyboard as he spoke. Unknown to Patricia, he was already composing emails to Linda Zhao, Skylink's chief legal officer. The messages were brief but pointed. Prepare HR files for Flight SK-1247 crew, full background checks, complaint histories, everything. The response came quickly. The legal team was standing by. Michael stepped closer, his voice low but audible to nearby passengers. He mentioned they'd had problems with fraudulent first-class tickets lately, people trying to live beyond their means. His eyes scanned Marcus's simple suit, the lack of flashy jewelry, the modest watch. Everything about Marcus screamed middle management to him, not first-class material. The irony was lost on Michael. The truly wealthy often dressed simply, while those desperate to appear rich adorned themselves with logos and labels. Marcus's understated appearance was itself a sign of genuine wealth, but prejudice blinded the crew to this reality. Sarah, a younger flight attendant, watched the scene with visible discomfort. She attempted to intervene, reminding Patricia they needed to prep for takeoff. Patricia's dismissal was sharp and immediate. This was a security matter, she declared. Perhaps Sarah should check on economy class, where she belonged. The hierarchical put-down served its purpose. Sarah retreated, but not before catching Marcus's eye. He saw her discomfort and filed it away. Not everyone here was complicit. As Patricia continued her harassment, asking about his travel history and the purpose of his trip, Marcus sent another text to his CFO. The preparations were already in motion. HR files were being pulled, complaint histories reviewed, termination protocols prepared. The crew of Flight SK-17-247 had no idea they were performing their discrimination for the last time. Patricia announced she would need to make copies of his documents for their records. She didn't ask permission, simply took them and headed toward the galley. Michael remained, standing over Marcus like a prison guard. His presence meant to remind the passenger of his place. The businessmen in 2B had seen enough. He spoke up more forcefully, questioning what exactly was happening here. Patricia assured him it was routine, but her voice wavered. The seed of doubt was planted. Other passengers were beginning to see the discrimination for what it was. Marcus closed his laptop slowly, meeting Michael's gaze for the first time. When Michael asked if this was his first time in first class, the question loaded with assumptions, Marcus's response was simple but prophetic. "No," he said quietly, "but it might be your last." Michael blinked, uncertain how to interpret the comment, unaware that the prediction would prove devastatingly accurate. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dimmed. Patricia approached Marcus's seat with renewed determination, this time carrying an iPad loaded with what she believed would be damning evidence. She had spent the first part of the flight manufacturing a case against him, and now she was ready to present it. She began, loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear, claiming she had been reviewing his booking history with their airline. "There seemed to be inconsistencies," she declared, pronouncing the last word carefully, savoring each syllable. The accusation hung in the air, waiting for Marcus to defend himself against charges that existed only in Patricia's prejudiced imagination. Marcus saved his work and closed his laptop, giving Patricia his full attention. He asked what kind of inconsistencies she meant. Patricia's lie came smooth and practiced. His previous flights had all been in economy class, and the sudden jump to first class raised red flags in their system. There was no such system, no such flags. She was manufacturing secession from thin air, creating a crime where none existed. From seat 3A, a young black woman named Jasmine began filming the interaction on her phone. Patricia noticed immediately and shifted her attention, demanding that Jasmine delete the video. Recording crew members without permission was prohibited, she claimed. Jasmine's response was firm and legally informed. She was recording a civil rights violation, which was protected under federal law. Michael appeared as if summoned, moving to block Jasmine's view. His attempt to physically intimidate her into compliance backfired when she announced she was live streaming to thousands of viewers. The incident was already escaping the confines of the aircraft, spreading across social media like wildfire. The cabin began to divide. Some passengers supported Marcus and Jasmine, recognizing the discrimination for what it was. Others remained silent, not wanting to get involved. A few seemed to side with the crew, their own prejudices aligning with Patricia's actions. An older white woman in 4B spoke up, calling the situation ridiculous and demanding they leave the man alone. But Patricia was committed now, driven by something deeper than protocol. She insisted this was a security matter, that they had to verify all first-class passengers were legitimate. Again, the pause before the final word spoke volumes. Marcus pulled out his phone, ostensibly checking messages but actually sending rapid-fire texts to his team. Legal counsel was being assembled, termination protocols prepared, documentation systems activated. The corporate machinery of justice was spinning up, though Patricia remained blissfully unaware. She snapped at him to put his phone away while she was speaking to him. Marcus's response was calm but pointed. He was responding to work emails and asked if that was also suspicious. The legal precision of his language should have warned them, but prejudice made them deaf to the danger. Michael stepped forward, asserting that when a crew member gave an instruction, passengers needed to comply immediately. Marcus countered by asking which specific FAA regulation prohibited email use during cruise. The question revealed a knowledge of aviation law that surprised them, cracking their confident facade. The situation escalated when Patricia made an unprecedented demand. She wanted to read his emails to verify they were really work. The request was so far beyond any reasonable authority that even passengers who had remained neutral looked shocked. She was crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, making demands that would seal her fate. Mr. Whitman in 2B finally spoke more forcefully, his privileged position giving weight to his words. He had been flying first class for 30 years and had never seen anything like this. What exactly was their probable cause? The man's skin color. The directness of the question made Patricia flinch, but she recovered, insisting race had nothing to do with it. Jasmine challenged this assertion from 3A, pointing out that she was sitting there with the same type of ticket, yet Patricia hadn't asked her for anything except to stop filming. The logic was inescapable. The only difference between her and Marcus was gender, and Patricia's focus on Marcus made the racial component undeniable. Sarah made another attempt to defuse the situation, approaching hesitantly. But Patricia's sharp rebuke sent her retreating again. Still, Marcus noticed Sarah pull out her own phone, typing rapidly. She was searching for something, and when her eyes widened with recognition, he knew she had found it. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers were choosing sides, battle lines were being drawn, and Patricia remained oblivious to the catastrophe she was orchestrating. Her prejudice had blinded her to the danger signs. Marcus, his calm confidence, his legal knowledge, his powerful connections, and most importantly, the cameras recording everything. As Michael headed to call the captain, announcing that he wanted to address this personally, Marcus sent one final text. Begin Phase 2. All teams stand by. The response was immediate. Legal on standby. PR draft prepared. Board notified. The trap was set, waiting only for Patricia and her accomplices to walk into it. Captain Robert Kingston emerged from the cockpit with the bearing of a man who believed his uniform granted him absolute authority. His silver hair and weathered face spoke to decades in the air, decades of unquestioned command. He surveyed the scene with cold eyes, his gaze lingering on Marcus with undisguised disdain. The captain's presence changed the dynamic immediately. Where Patricia and Michael had been petty tyrants, Robert brought institutional weight to their prejudice. He addressed Patricia first, not Marcus, immediately establishing whose side he had chosen before hearing any facts. Patricia delivered her report with military precision, each lie building upon the last. This passenger had been uncooperative with security screening procedures. He had refused to adequately explain his presence in first class. They had concerns about the legitimacy of his ticket. The fabrications flowed smoothly, practiced over years of unchallenged discrimination. Robert nodded gravely, then turned to Marcus with the demeanor of a judge who had already decided the verdict. He introduced himself with unnecessary formality, emphasizing his absolute authority on the aircraft. His order was simple: comply with his crew's instructions immediately. The threat was implicit but clear. Marcus's response was measured and precise. He understood the captain's authority, but what specific instructions had he failed to comply with? He had shown his ticket, his identification, his credit card. What else was required? The reasonable questions were met with anger. Robert was not accustomed to passengers who didn't immediately cower before his authority. The captain's face reddened as he snapped that Marcus's attitude was the problem. He was creating a hostile environment for the crew and other passengers. Marcus's quiet question, by sitting quietly and working on his laptop, drew nervous chuckles from some passengers and deepened Robert's rage. The threat escalated dramatically. Robert announced that Marcus had one opportunity to voluntarily move to an economy seat where he would be more comfortable, or the flight would be diverted and he would be removed by law enforcement. The nuclear option had been deployed. Diverting a flight affected everyone aboard, turning the entire passenger manifest into Robert's hostages. The cabin erupted. Multiple passengers began objecting, pointing out that Marcus had done nothing wrong. Miranda Chen, a civil rights attorney in 5A, stood up and identified herself, warning the captain that he was exposing the airline to massive liability. Robert's response was to threaten her as well. Sit down or need her own attorney. The captain's aggression emboldened Patricia. In a moment of calculated cruelty, she leaned over Marcus's seat and deliberately knocked his water glass onto his laptop. Her apology was sickeningly sweet, the act of vandalism dressed up as clumsiness. As Marcus calmly reached for napkins to dry his laptop, Patricia committed her fatal error. She grabbed his phone from the armrest. The theft was brazen, witnessed by dozens. Patricia claimed she was confiscating the device as a security measure. Marcus's response was calm but clear. That was theft, and he demanded she return his property immediately. Robert smirked, claiming he hadn't seen any theft, only a crew member securing a potential threat. The cabin divided completely. Passengers shouted objections. Cameras recorded from every angle. Jasmine announced that 50,000 people were now watching live, warning the crew they were destroying their careers. Robert interpreted this as a threat, ordering Michael to call for backup because they had multiple hostile passengers. Marcus stood slowly, his bearing changing subtly but noticeably. When he spoke, his voice carried a new weight that made even supportive passengers lean in. He addressed the three crew members by their full names: Captain Robert Kingston, Patricia Henderson, Michael Torres, and told them to remember his next words carefully. They had approximately 15 minutes before their lives changed irrevocably. He was giving them this chance to return his property, apologize, and return to their duties. This was their only warning. The specificity of the timeline, the calm certainty of his delivery should have terrified them. Instead, Patricia laughed, an ugly sound that would haunt her later. She accused him of threatening the crew, Marcus clarified with legal precision. He was promising consequences for theft and discrimination, legal consequences, career consequences, financial consequences. Michael sneered that these were big words from someone who couldn't even prove he belonged there, unaware that Marcus could prove far more than that. Prepared for the possibility of phone confiscation, Marcus pulled out a second phone from his jacket. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. The brief conversation with Linda, confirming she was in position at the gate with all documentation ready, sent chills through several passengers. Who was at what gate? What documentation? Sarah, the junior flight attendant, gasped audibly as she frantically searched on her phone. Whatever she found made her attempt another intervention, but Patricia's screaming dismissal, calling her a traitor, ordering her to shut up, only emphasized how completely the senior crew had lost control. The final warning came with Marcus checking his phone. 10 minutes, he announced. 10 minutes to make this right. Robert's declaration that the only thing happening in 10 minutes would be Marcus moving to economy or being restrained was met with incredulity from the watching passengers. Patricia waved Marcus's stolen phone triumphantly, declaring it would be turned over to authorities as evidence of his threats. The die was cast. 3 crew members, drunk on their perceived power and blinded by prejudice, had committed crimes in full view of dozens of witnesses and thousands of online viewers. They had stolen from a passenger, vandalized his property, and threatened illegal detention. They had 10 minutes left to save their careers, their reputations, their futures. They would waste every second in the cabin of Flight Scale 1247 transformed into a battlefield of wills. What had started as discrimination against one passenger erupted into a full-scale confrontation that would reshape the airline industry. Patricia clutched Marcus's stolen phone like a trophy, while Captain Robert positioned himself as the ultimate authority, blind to the tsunami of consequences approaching. The first level of escalation began when Robert announced emergency protocols for what he called a disruptive passenger situation. The irony was lost on him. The only disruption had come from his crew's discrimination. Mr. Whitman from 2B voiced what many were thinking, pointing out that he had witnessed everything, and the only threats had come from the crew themselves. Michael's attempt to control the narrative by confiscating phones from recording passengers backfired spectacularly. When he moved toward David in 6A, demanding he stop recording, David pulled back and shouted that Michael was trying to take his phone too. The attempted theft of a second phone in full view of everyone shattered any remaining pretense that this was about security. Sarah's courage finally overcame her fear. Despite being ordered to sit in the jump seat, she refused, standing in the aisle and declaring to the passengers that what they were doing was wrong. Mr. Johnson hadn't done anything except exist while black. Patricia's response stripped away the last veneer of professionalism. She shrieked that Sarah was fired, that she was done in this industry. The mask had slipped completely. What had been coded as security concerns revealed itself as naked prejudice. The admission that this was about race, captured on multiple cameras and live streams, would prove devastating in the legal proceedings to come. The second level of escalation arrived with passenger polarization. A man in 8B, clearly siding with the crew, stood up and demanded to know why you people were making such a fuss. If Marcus had just cooperated, none of this would be happening. The racist dog whistle was heard by everyone. Jasmine whirled on him, demanding he say what he really meant. His sneer, that they knew what he meant, always playing the victim, always causing problems, brought unexpected allies to Marcus's defense. Mr. Whitman surprised everyone with his vehement response. The elderly white businessman declared that the only problem here was racism, and he was ashamed it had taken him this long to say it out loud. His privilege and status gave his words weight that Patricia and Robert couldn't dismiss. Though they tried, more passengers began sharing their own experiences. An elderly black woman in 7A began crying, saying this was like the 1960s all over again. She thought they were past this. Her tears galvanized others. A young white man in 4A announced he was calling Skylink customer service right then, putting his phone on speaker so everyone could hear him file a formal complaint about witnessing discrimination on Flight 1247. The rebellion spread through the cabin like wildfire. Within moments, multiple passengers were calling the airline, posting on social media, texting news outlets. The incident escaped the confines of the aircraft entirely, spreading across the digital world at the speed of outrage. Videos with titles like "Skylink Crew Discriminates Against Black Passenger" were already accumulating thousands of views and shares. The third and most dramatic level of escalation came when Michael returned with plastic restraints. The sight of the restraints caused an uproar that Robert's shouted demands for order couldn't quell. The visual of a black man about to be tied up for the crime of sitting in his paid seat while white passengers watched was too much for even the previously silent to bear. Miranda Chen positioned herself strategically, warning that if they laid hands on Marcus, her law firm would own the airline. Her presence as a civil rights attorney transformed the situation from a customer service disaster to a legal catastrophe in waiting. Other passengers stood up, physically placing themselves between Marcus and the crew, creating a human barrier against injustice. Marcus remained calm throughout, occasionally checking his backup phone and announcing the time remaining. 7 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Each announcement ratcheted up the tension. Patricia still held his stolen phone, but her triumphant expression had been replaced by something approaching fear. She had started something she couldn't stop, and the countdown felt like a doomsday clock. When Marcus's backup phone rang and he answered it on speaker, Linda's confirmation that the board was assembled, the press was notified, and they were awaiting his final instruction, sent visible shudders through the crew. The mention of the board cracked Robert's confident facade. What board? What press? Even Roger, the bigoted passenger from 8B, seemed to realize something monumental was happening. The specific corporate language being used suggested power structures far above what they had assumed about the well-dressed black man in 1A. The crew exchanged glances, pride warring with growing fear. With 1 minute remaining, Robert made a desperate attempt to de-escalate, suggesting they had gotten off on the wrong foot. Marcus's interruption, 2 minutes, brooked no negotiation. The cabin held its breath as the final seconds ticked away. Patricia reluctantly extended the phone toward Marcus, but her pride demanded one last act of defiance. She held it just out of reach, making him lean for it. The words, "Here's your precious phone. Happy now?" would replay in her nightmares for years to come. Marcus's calm insistence on an apology, the countdown reaching 10 seconds, 5 seconds, finally broke their resistance. Robert's shouted apology came with 2 seconds to spare, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen who they really were, and Marcus's call to Linda to stand down but stay in position made it clear this wasn't over. The immediate crisis passed, but the atmosphere remained electric with anticipation. Marcus returned to his seat with his phone, but everyone in the cabin knew they were suspended in the eye of a storm. What happened next would become legendary in corporate justice, shared in business schools and diversity training sessions for decades to come. Marcus opened his laptop again, but this time he made no effort to hide the screen. The Skylink Airlines logo appeared prominently, followed by spreadsheets showing ownership percentages, board compositions, and executive hierarchies. Patricia, still hovering nearby despite everything, caught a glimpse of the screen. The blood drained from her face as she recognized internal documents that should have been impossible for a passenger to possess. When Marcus called out to Sarah, asking what she had tried to tell them earlier, the young flight attendant found her courage. She stepped forward with her phone, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and vindication. She had Googled Marcus Johnson and found the press release that was embargoed until Monday. The acquisition announcement, the new ownership structure, the new CEO. The words landed like bombs in the first-class cabin. Marcus Johnson owned Skylink Airlines. He stood with a different bearing now, the quiet dignity remaining but accompanied by an unmistakable aura of absolute authority. His voice carried to every corner of the cabin as he formally introduced himself. 5 days ago, his investment group had completed the acquisition of Skylink Airlines. As of 9 a.m. the previous Monday, he owned 78% of the company. He had chosen to fly commercially, in secret, to evaluate their customer service firsthand, to see how they treated passengers when they thought no one important was watching. The revelation hit the crew like a physical blow. Patricia dropped the coffee pot she was holding, the shattering sound punctuating the moment like an exclamation point. Her whispered denials that it wasn't possible, he couldn't be, fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth, undeniable. Marcus turned his laptop screen toward the cabin, showing the internal announcement that was supposed to go out Monday. His photo, his biography, his vision for transforming Skylink into an industry leader in inclusive service. The corporate speak couldn't hide the revolutionary nature of his plans. This was a man who intended to remake the airline from the ground up. The reaction from passengers was immediate and visceral. Jasmine from 3A whooped with delight, announcing to her live stream viewers that they had discriminated against their own CEO. The viewer count had passed 100,000 and climbing. The sweet taste of justice was palpable in the air. Robert's leg seemed to give out. He grabbed a seat back for support, his decades of command evaporating in an instant. His weak protest that this had to be a mistake, that Marcus was lying, prompted a devastating response. Marcus pulled out his backup phone and dialed Chairman Williams, then handed the phone to Robert. The one-sided conversation was painful to witness. Robert's face drained of color with each, "Yes, sir," and "I understand, sir." The chairman of Skylink's board of directors, a man with 25 years with the airline, had just confirmed that the passenger Robert had threatened to have arrested in restraints was, in fact, his boss. His boss's boss. The man who could end his career with a word. When Robert handed the phone back, his hand shaking visibly, Marcus asked with perfect calm if the chairman had confirmed his identity. Robert could only nod, the power of speech having deserted him along with his authority. Michael backed away slowly, as if distance might somehow save him from the consequences bearing down like a freight train. Patricia began to hyperventilate, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. She didn't know. How could she know? He didn't look like... She caught herself, but too late. Marcus's question hung in the air like a blade. Like what? Like a CEO? Like someone who belongs in first class? Like someone who could own an airline? What exactly should he look like? Patricia had no answer. The prejudice that had seemed so justified moments ago now appeared as what it always was. Ugly, baseless bigotry that had cost her everything. The other passengers reacted with a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and vindication. Miranda Chen's laughter was rich with appreciation for the cosmic justice she had just witnessed. Mr. Whitman's slow applause spread through the cabin as others joined in, a standing ovation for the most spectacular reversal of fortune any of them had ever seen. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled up another screen on his laptop, calling Linda again. The instruction to board the aircraft with termination paperwork sent Patricia into full panic. Her cries that he couldn't do this, that she had seniority, that she had a family met with no sympathy from Marcus or the passengers who had watched her cruelty. His response was measured but merciless. She should have thought about her family before humiliating a passenger based on his skin color. Every choice had been hers. The discrimination, the escalation, the theft, the vandalism. He hadn't made those choices for her. Through the windows, passengers could see vehicles approaching the plane. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Not Robert, but the co-pilot, announcing their return to the gate due to a personnel issue. The careful phrasing couldn't hide the magnitude of what was happening. Robert's accusation that this had been a setup met with a devastating response from Marcus. He had given them every opportunity to treat him with basic human dignity. They had chosen discrimination. They had chosen escalation. They had chosen to steal from him and threaten him with restraints. He hadn't made those choices for them. They had walked into consequences of their own making. When the aircraft door opened and Linda Zhao entered, followed by security officers and HR representatives, the finality of the moment was inescapable. Linda's professional greeting to Marcus, the formal documentation she carried, the security presence, all of it spoke to a corporate execution that had been planned down to the smallest detail. The termination was swift and merciless. Patricia Henderson, Michael Torres, and Captain Robert Kingston were informed their employment with Skylink Airlines had ended immediately for gross misconduct, discrimination, theft, and violation of company policies. Their union contracts didn't protect discrimination or theft. Security would escort them off the aircraft after they gathered their personal belongings. The contrast with Sarah's fate couldn't have been starker. When she fearfully asked about her own status, having been relieved of duty by Patricia, Marcus's expression softened. Her moral courage when it mattered most was exactly what Skylink needed. Not only was she not fired, she was promoted to lead flight attendant for the route, effective immediately. Her tears of relief and gratitude provided a humanizing moment in the corporate drama. As security moved to escort the terminated employees out, Patricia made one last desperate attempt, literally falling to her knees and begging. Her pleas about her children met with Marcus's observation that black mothers and fathers she had humiliated over the years had children too. Actions had consequences. Today, she was learning that lesson. The applause that erupted as they were removed was spontaneous and sustained. Justice had been served at 35,000 feet, witnessed by hundreds in person and hundreds of thousands online. But more than personal justice, this was systemic change in action. Marcus addressed the cabin one more time, apologizing for what they had witnessed, while promising immediate changes to ensure every passenger would be treated with dignity and respect. impact. His announcement that Tom, the flight attendant who had also shown integrity, would lead the development of Skylink's new diversity and inclusion training program sent a clear message. Those who stood up for what was right would be rewarded. Those who perpetuated discrimination would be removed. The old Skylink was dead. A new airline was being born in the crucible of Flight 1247. The news spread faster than any wildfire could burn. Before Flight 1247 touched down at its destination, Skylink CEO had become the top trending topic globally across every major social media platform. The live stream videos had been shared millions of times, spawning countless reaction videos, memes, and think pieces. Marcus Johnson became a household name within hours, but more importantly, Patricia Henderson, Michael Torres, and Robert Kingston became the faces of consequence for discrimination. At Skylink's headquarters, the communications department worked around the clock. Phone lines were jammed with reporters demanding statements, interviews, and explanations. The pre-drafted press release Marcus had authorized was clear and uncompromising. Skylink Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination. Today's incident aboard Flight 1247 resulted in the immediate termination of 3 employees who violated our core values. Under new leadership, we commit to serving all passengers with equal dignity and respect. The terminations sent shockwaves through the airline industry. Patricia Henderson's name became radioactive within hours. Aviation forums and social media platforms filled with stories from passengers who had experienced her discrimination. An Asian businessman shared how she had made him show his passport 3 times on a domestic flight. A Latino doctor revealed she had questioned whether he had stolen the credit card he used to purchase his ticket. Story after story painted a picture of systematic discrimination that had been allowed to flourish unchecked for years. The Flight Attendants Union issued a carefully worded statement distancing themselves from Patricia's actions. While they protected members' rights, they could not and would not defend discrimination. Her union representative declined to pursue her case after reviewing the video evidence, recognizing the futility of defending the indefensible. Michael Torres fared no better. His personnel file, now under legal review, revealed multiple passenger complaints that had been mysteriously dismissed or downgraded. A Native American passenger's complaint from 6 months prior described how Michael had physically blocked her from using the first-class bathroom, insisting she belonged in economy despite her valid ticket. Another complaint from a black businesswoman detailed how he had accidentally spilled coffee on her laptop after questioning how she could afford first class. Each complaint had been marked, resolved, without proper investigation, revealing a pattern of protected prejudice. Captain Robert Kingston's fall was the most spectacular of all. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an immediate investigation into his threat to divert the flight based on racial discrimination. His pilot's license was temporarily suspended pending review, effectively grounding him. The Allied Pilots Association took the unprecedented step of issuing a public condemnation, stating that Captain Kingston's behavior had endangered passenger safety and violated federal anti-discrimination laws. Within 48 hours, Kingston's entire career came under scrutiny. Former colleagues emerged from the shadows with stories they had been too frightened to tell before. A retired black pilot revealed how Robert had made his life hell when he joined Skylink 15 years ago, telling him that people like you don't belong in cockpits. A female first officer shared how he had refused to fly with women pilots, claiming they were too emotional for the job. The picture that emerged was of a man whose prejudices had been an open secret, protected by a system that valued seniority over justice. The financial consequences hit immediately and hard. Patricia's mortgage company, after seeing the viral video, began strictly enforcing every regulation when she missed her first payment just 2 months later. Her loan officer, a black woman who had experienced similar discrimination, ensured every technicality was observed. Michael discovered that his side business teaching self-defense classes hemorrhaged clients overnight. "I won't learn from a racist," became a common refrain on his business's social media pages. Robert's consulting firm, where he had moonlighted as an aviation expert, dropped him within hours of the video surfacing, citing a morality clause in his contract. Social consequences proved equally devastating. Patricia's daughter, a college sophomore, faced constant questions from classmates who had seen the video. Her protests that her mother wasn't racist rang hollow against the video evidence. The daughter eventually transferred schools to escape the association, their relationship strained beyond repair. Michael's wife, who worked in healthcare, found colleagues reluctant to interact with her. Their marriage crumbled under the weight of the revelation and subsequent financial stress. Robert's country club revoked his membership after members complained they couldn't have someone like that representing their institution. The three former employees became cautionary tales in aviation training programs worldwide. Their faces appeared in diversity workshops as examples of how prejudice could destroy careers in minutes. Universities incorporated the incident into business ethics courses. Law schools analyzed it in discrimination law classes. Their names became synonymous with the consequences of unchecked bigotry. Meanwhile, Skylink's transformation under Marcus's leadership was swift and comprehensive. A reparations fund was established for passengers who had filed discrimination complaints that were ignored under the previous regime. Settlements were offered, apologies issued, and lifetime first-class upgrades extended to those who had suffered discrimination. The gesture cost millions, but rebuilt trust that had been eroded over years. The ripple effects spread throughout the aviation industry. Other airlines conducted internal reviews, fearful of similar revelations. Several carriers announced enhanced diversity training programs. Complaint procedures were overhauled to ensure discrimination reports couldn't be buried. The phrase Flight 1247 moment entered corporate lexicon as shorthand for a discrimination scandal that could destroy a company's reputation. A year later, a local news station tracked down the three terminated employees for a "Where Are They Now" segment. Patricia worked at a small grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood, the only job she could find after dozens of rejections. She bagged groceries with her head down, avoiding eye contact with customers who might recognize her. When interviewed, she claimed to have learned from her mistakes, but her bitter tone suggested otherwise. Michael drove for a rideshare service, using only his first name and praying passengers wouldn't make the connection to the viral video. His earnings barely covered basic expenses, a far cry from his flight attendant salary. He had applied to several airlines, but was rejected immediately upon background check. Robert lived alone in a small apartment, his pilot's license permanently revoked after the FAA investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning decades. His wife had divorced him, taking half of his pension in the settlement. His children rarely called. He spent his days writing angry letters to aviation magazines, blaming cancel culture for his downfall, refusing to acknowledge that his own actions had canceled his career. The contrast with those who had shown integrity was stark. Sarah had flourished in her new role, becoming one of Skylink's most requested flight attendants. Tom's diversity program had won industry awards and was being licensed to other airlines. They had chosen conscience over comfort and reaped the rewards. The incident's impact on Skylink's bottom line was profound. Customer satisfaction scores soared, particularly among minority passengers who finally felt welcomed rather than merely tolerated. Revenue increased by 18% in the first year under Marcus's leadership, driven by customers who chose to fly with an airline that publicly stood against discrimination. Stock prices reached record highs. The company that had once harbored prejudice became an industry leader in inclusive excellence. 6 months after the incident on Flight 1247, Marcus Johnson stood before a gathering of Skylink employees at the company's annual meeting. The transformation in the audience was remarkable. Where once it had been homogeneous, it now reflected the beautiful diversity of America. Sarah sat in the front row, wearing the insignia of a senior training supervisor. Tom led the diversity department with distinction, his programs having transformed the company culture. New faces filled positions throughout the organization, hired through blind recruitment processes that prioritized competence over connections. Marcus began his address by reflecting on that fateful flight. He had boarded expecting to evaluate customer service, but had instead uncovered something far more insidious. A culture that had normalized prejudice, that had made discrimination standard operating procedure. But he had also discovered something else. The courage of individuals like Sarah and Tom, who stood up when it mattered most. They had reminded him that change didn't come from the top down, but from people choosing to do right when doing wrong was easier. The quarterly reports told a powerful story of transformation. Customer satisfaction scores had reached industry-leading levels. Revenue was up, costs were down, and employee satisfaction had never been higher. But Marcus focused on the human impact behind the numbers. Over 3,000 past discrimination complaints had been resolved, with compensation and apologies provided to those the company had failed. The blind recruitment process had increased diversity at every level, from baggage handlers to board members. An anonymous reporting system ensured no complaint went uninvestigated. Marcus shared specific victories that brought the transformation to life. A young black girl who had witnessed the incident on social media had written to him, saying that seeing him stand up for himself with such dignity had inspired her to apply to aviation school. She was now in her first year, determined to become a pilot who would make every passenger feel welcome in the sky. Her letter was one of hundreds from people who had found courage in his calm resistance to injustice. He addressed the economic argument directly, countering those who had said the terminations were too harsh. Those 3 careers had been built on destroying the dignity of countless passengers over years. How many people had chosen to drive rather than fly because of how they were treated? How many young professionals had taken their business elsewhere? How many families had been humiliated in front of their children? Discrimination wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was financially foolish. Sarah spoke next, sharing her perspective on the transformation. That day had changed her life, not just because of the promotion, but because she had learned that silence in the face of injustice was complicity. Every time she trained new flight attendants, she told them about Flight 1247. She told them about the moment they would inevitably face when they must choose between comfort and conscience. She told them to choose conscience, always. Tom added his thoughts on the company's cultural evolution. They had moved from diversity as a checkbox to inclusion as a core value. The training programs didn't just tell employees not to discriminate. They helped them understand why discrimination hurt everyone, including themselves. They weren't just changing policies, they were changing hearts and minds. Marcus returned to conclude his remarks with a broader message. Some had asked if he regretted how things had unfolded. The truth was, he regretted that it had been necessary. He regretted that in 2025, a black man still needed to own an airline to be treated with respect on one, but he didn't regret the consequences faced by those who had chosen cruelty over kindness, prejudice over professionalism. He looked directly into the cameras broadcasting the meeting. knowing his words would reach far beyond the assembled employees. To every person who had been made to feel less than, who had been questioned and doubted and humiliated because of who they were, their dignity was not negotiable. To every employee who witnessed discrimination, their silence was a choice, and they could choose differently. To every leader watching, the culture they tolerated was the culture they created. The meeting concluded with the announcement of the Marcus Johnson Foundation, funded by his personal wealth and dedicated to supporting victims of discrimination in pursuing justice. Because not everyone could own the company, but everyone deserved to own their dignity. The foundation would provide legal support, document discrimination, and push for systemic change across industries. Marcus's final words to the assembly carried the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. Change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable when good people refused to accept bad behavior. Flight 1247 had proved that. Now it was up to all of them to keep proving it, every single day. In every interaction, in every decision, in every moment when they could choose between prejudice and justice, they had the power to create the world they wanted to live in. As employees filed out, energized and inspired, many approached Marcus personally. Some thanked him for his courage. Others shared their own stories of discrimination overcome. The morning that had started with one man's stand against injustice had become a movement, a transformation that would ripple out far beyond Skylink Airlines. In interviews following the meeting, Marcus consistently emphasized that this wasn't about him. It was about every person who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. It was about creating a world where dignity was the default, not the exception. It was about proving that doing right was not just morally necessary, but good business. The financial press marveled at Skylink's transformation. A company that had been struggling before the acquisition was now outperforming its competitors. The stock price had doubled. Customer loyalty was at an all-time high. The case study would be taught in business schools for decades. Proof that principles and profits weren't mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing. But perhaps the most powerful testament to the change came from the passengers. Letters poured in from people who had noticed the difference. Families who had dreaded flying because of past discrimination now looked forward to it. Business travelers who had avoided Skylink began booking exclusively with them. The airline that had once been known for its discrimination was now known for its dignity. Marcus often thought about Patricia, Michael, and Robert. He took no pleasure in their downfall but recognized it as necessary. They had been given every opportunity to choose differently and had refused. Their destruction served as a warning to others who might be tempted to let prejudice guide their actions. In a just world, such warnings wouldn't be necessary. But until that world existed, examples had to be made. The story of Flight 1247 resonates because it speaks to a universal truth. We all have power, whether we recognize it or not. Marcus Johnson had the power of ownership, but that came after years of building his success despite discrimination. Sarah had the power of courage, choosing to speak truth despite the risk to her career. Tom had the power of allyship, supporting what was right when he could have remained silent. Even the passengers who filmed and spoke up had the power of witness, ensuring that injustice couldn't hide in the shadows. Every day, in countless interactions, we face our own versions of Flight 1247. We see discrimination in hiring committees, witness prejudice in service industries, observe bias in classrooms and boardrooms. Most of us aren't CEOs who can fire perpetrators on the spot. But we can speak up. We can record. We can refuse to be silent accomplices to injustice. We can choose to be the Sarah in the situation, not the Patricia. The next time you witness someone being treated as less than human because of their race, gender, religion, or any other characteristic, you have a choice. You can be Patricia, actively participating in discrimination. You can be the silent passengers who initially did nothing. Or you can be the voices that rose up, the phones that recorded, the conscience that said this is wrong. Marcus Johnson's message echoes beyond the aviation industry. No one should have to look like money to be treated like a person. No one should need viral video evidence to be believed. No one should have to prove they belong in spaces they've rightfully entered. But until that day comes, we must use whatever power we have, our voices, our votes, our dollars, our platforms, to bend the arc toward justice. The revolution doesn't require a fortune or a famous name. It requires only the decision to act when action is needed, to speak when silence enables harm, to stand when others kneel before prejudice. Every Marcus Johnson started as someone who simply refused to accept the unacceptable. Every Sarah found her voice in a moment of moral clarity. Every transformation began with someone saying, "Enough is enough." Your Flight 1247 moment is coming. It may be in a workplace where someone is passed over because of their appearance. It may be in a restaurant where service depends on skin color. It may be in a school where children learn that some matter more than others. You may be the victim, the witness, or even the reformed perpetrator. When that moment arrives, remember, dignity is not negotiable, justice is not optional, and change is not someone else's responsibility. Stand up, speak out, record truth, demand better. Because when we all refuse to accept discrimination, when we all insist on justice, when we all use our power for good, that's when "you don't belong here" becomes "everyone belongs here." That's when first class isn't about privilege, but about how we treat each other. That's when we stop needing heroes like Marcus Johnson, because we've all become heroes in our own right. The choice is yours. The moment is now. The world is watching. What will you do when your Flight 1247 takes off?